They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Happy Women Podcast, episode number 6 already. Time is just flying by, and I am so happy to be here with you once again. I'm Jennifer Horn.
I'm Katie Gorka.
And we have lots to talk about today. So first of all, I don't know where time went and our life went, but it is literally college graduation season already. And the graduations are almost over. It seems like the encampments that we've seen so much of, all of these pro-Hamas protesters, many of them have been cleared, although it's a slow process. So we had locally, I live in Los Angeles, Pomona College had to move their graduation to the Shrine Auditorium. And literally these pro-Hamas protesters go 30 miles and they still shut down the streets in Los Angeles. This is an ongoing struggle. But as universities are getting more serious, Katie, about shutting these protests down, you have to wonder what happens next, because this is not a problem that is going to go away. These are not people who are not going to get the same influences that they've already been under. Just because school might be coming to an end doesn't mean this is going to stop.
Yeah, so I think it's amazing. You've got now just right around 3,000 arrests on 61 different campuses. Yes, they've managed to clear out many of the encampments, but I don't think this is going away. I mean, one of the things that's been so interesting about the arrests is that it's given, insight into who is there. Of course, we've learned a lot about outside agitators, outside organizations coming in. It sounds like at a lot of these things, you've got about half students, half outsiders. But we're also not talking enough about the fact that you've got professors there as well. I was particularly struck to hear a recording of a Professor Muhammad Abdu at Columbia University. So he claimed to be the first professor to actually go and teach his classes in the encampment. Now, here's his class: Queer and Feminist BIPOC Traditions from Decolonial Abolitionist Perspectives.
I'd rather get
I'm
shingles.
sorry, but
I'd rather get shingles than sit through that class.
But if we've got professors teaching that, and if we've still got the enormous, bloated, overpaid DEI bureaucracy on all these schools, we've got a bigger problem here, because the bottom line is it's the DEI mindset and it's the DEI administrative bloat that paved the way for this. Yeah. You've got schools with, many with over 100 DEI bureaucrats. They are spending, some of them as much as $20 to $30 million a year just on their DEI staff. And let's face it, DEI administrators are the thought police.
They sure are. And, it absolutely kills me because, you see kids and you see them kind of on the wrong side of history and you think, okay, these are just dumb college students who haven't experienced life, or they haven't realized the struggles of what people have gone through. They don't know the story of the Jewish people, what Jewish people have been through in this world. But when you have these teachers out there, I think that to me is the most disturbing part of these protests, is that the teachers and the administrators are letting it happen, not because they want to give these people room to protest, because I can tell you what, if I walked on a campus with the Trump 2024 t-shirt, I'd probably be thrown off in about 10 seconds flat, right? I mean, they get rid of the Ben Shapiros of the world going to these college campuses, but these people are allowed to have their place to protest, not because they care about free speech. It's because these administrators and these college professors agree with what these pro-Hamas protesters are spewing. And that is absolutely stunning, because I want to believe the best in people, and I want to believe that there actually is still right and wrong. And I don't know how these people get on the wrong side of this, especially the people who are supposed to be teaching the kids and running the schools.
Well, and I think what's every bit as upsetting as well is that it's not just happening in college. So I want to give a shout out to a teacher in Providence, Rhode Island. I met her I think it was this winter at an event at Mar-a-Lago. And I've just been so impressed with her. Her name is Ramona Bessinger. You can follow her on Twitter. She is an amazing source of information about what's happening in K through 12. And she's been something of a whistleblower. But she said, one of the reasons that we are where we are today is because, at least in the schools she was teaching at, which was for the Providence district in Rhode Island, she said they had eliminated all the books about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism.
Wow.
So think about that. How that happens as well. I mean, I get it when universities go and hire, crazy radical liberal, not even liberal, just radical professors like this Professor Mohammed Abdu at Columbia. But this is our K through 12 teachers.
I know.
Throwing out books about the Holocaust. I mean, that kills me.
I think there were a couple of very impactful books that I read growing up, and I can still remember this. When my mom, I talk about her a lot. She was a teacher, and when I was in 7th grade, I had to choose a book. I don't even know what the book report was on, but she directed me to the book Night by Elie Wiesel, which is not a big book. I mean, it's really small, easy to read, but some of the most, I think the imagery that he used, who's a Holocaust survivor, talks all about it in the book. That was so impactful to me that it really did give me the worldview that I have. And so you can imagine when these kids have literally had huge pieces of our history just erased from them by the people in the schools who do want to promote Marxism, who do want to promote all of this. They don't have the same worldview unless they have very engaged parents who are like you or who like my parents were, who said, read this, understand this. And how many parents are willing to do that work right now? I'd love to say a lot, but I don't know if that's the right answer.
And I think you also have the added problem that, at this stage, so many of the actual Holocaust survivors are no longer with us. So you don't have that living history. I mean, I remember when I was in grade school, one of my close friends, her parents both still bore the tattoos of Auschwitz. Think about that. It was that close in time. And now when you lose that living history, I think you lose something really vital. And then the books become all the more important. But I would also add the films. I think films are extremely important as well. Sure. And I just worry that all these things are being erased from education. And I don't know how are we going to fight this,
Especially when you have ignorance, right? When you have people who just don't know. And that makes it really hard. And you also have people who are willingly trying to mislead people. I mean, if you listen to our elected officials in Congress, not ours necessarily, but if you look at the squad, if you look at the news media, and you look at the people who are helping this narrative along about now Jews who are ultimately, I mean, Israel's ultimately probably, I mean, you can argue that they are one of the most oppressed class of people historically in our world. But what you're hearing right now is that they are the ones who are the oppressors on the Palestinians, on the people of Gaza. I don't know if you saw the story. It just came out as we record today. But the UN overshot the amount of deaths that have happened in the Israel-Hamas war at this point. And those numbers were being used. They were being spun all around about Israel killing innocent women and children. The numbers were cut more than half by the United Nations. And they didn't do it with a press release. They did it quietly. They did it at the end of a day. They revised these numbers, and then nobody hears about it. And so there's so many issues that we have that we're dealing with right now. And that is just a lack of truth and a lack of transparency. You've got people who are willingly misleading kids on college campuses, eliminating pieces of history. And you have a news media, by and large, at least in the mainstream, that are knowingly misleading people and choosing not to tell truthful stories if it doesn't fit the narrative. And that makes it a really difficult time to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think is going to happen if we get a different president? And what are the chances of that happening? Do you think that'll make a difference?
It's a really good question. I would like to say yes. And I definitely think that if we get a new president, and that president, if you're watching us on video, fingers crossed, is President Trump, I think there's a good chance of that. I do think that at least you have someone who is going to lead by example and is not going to be flip-flopping all over the place, trying to appease groups of people for votes rather than for what is right and wrong. I think that President Trump has been the strongest ally to Israel that we've had in the White House. And so I would feel better in that way because we'd have strong leadership. But protests will happen whether President Trump's in the White House or not. And I think it's how we handle it in our community. And I think we as people need to make sure that we tell these individuals what our limitations are. Fine, you want to have an anti-war protest, great. But when you start preventing kids from going to school or you start burning down cities, that is unacceptable. And I think law enforcement has to be ready. I think good citizens need to be ready. I think college campuses need to be ready because I don't know that this gets better. I mean, there are talks that they're going to cancel the DNC because they don't trust that these protesters aren't going to be disruptive in Chicago.
I think they will be disruptive in Chicago. But I have to tell you though, if they are able to have the DNC canceled, that is really bad news for our country. I mean, because all that's going to do is it's going to embolden them.
Mm-hmm. Now, just switching gears a bit, because I thought of you this week. I think there's a story that people haven't seen much of. And this is one that I live in California, as we talk about. The University of California at San Diego is now making it their mission to allow people into their school or not into their school based on parents' income, on their race, on their status, I guess, in life. And I thought about this with you in mind because I know, and I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but I'm sure you've talked about this before, that your son is having a really hard time getting into medical school. And it seems that we aren't looking for the best and brightest anymore. There's another example now of UCSD saying kids aren't going to go into a 4-year institution if their parents make too much money. It's unreal.
That's right. So what they're saying that they're going to judge people according to 4 criteria, having a grade point average above 3.0, certain tests, I think test scores, but then they're going to look at parental income and whether this is a first generation college goer or not. And I mean, it's really hard for me to talk about because it is very personal. Our son scored in the 91st percentile on the MCAT, the big test to get into med school. And he had a very high GPA in college. He can't even get into his backups or his fallbacks. Like it's just incredible. But the whole idea, the very fact that the headline of this article is that they now discriminate. And that's what we're seeing all over the place now, right? And the people on the left, the people that are pushing this, I think they have no qualms about calling it reverse discrimination, right? And they think that it's justified, and it's so un-American. And I can only hope that eventually the injustice of this will get underneath the skin of enough people that they will really fight back in some way. Whether that's refusing to send their kids to these schools, whether it's withholding their alumni donations to these schools, and whether it's getting to the ballot box and voting for new leadership in our country. Because I think that's, you and I, we always say this, right? Washington can't fix this. But Washington is absolutely part of the solution. We need new leadership without a doubt.
Top. And that's the thing. You need strong leadership at the top to trickle down and impact everything beneath it. I do want to ask you an interesting question. I've been having a debate about this with different people in my life. And our colleague at Salem Radio, Charlie Kirk, has made it his mission for many years, not just now, but of course, especially now because of all the protests and because of the things we're talking about at UCSD, where kids are going to be now, one of the criteria is parental income. But he says that kids just shouldn't go to college, just in general. And I have to say, as someone who I did complete my 4-year degree, but I always felt that my life experience served me even more than my experience in college. The great thing about college is I found things that I didn't know I was interested in, like art history, like different types of literature or different types of films. I found that through college, but I can't say that I found the things that make me successful in my life. I found that working. I found that starting to work for my dad at a really young age and putting myself in positions to keep growing and kind of pushing. So I can understand how college is not for everybody, and I don't think it should be. I'm a big believer in trade schools, big believer in educating yourself, taking personal responsibility to continue your education through life. But I don't know if I agree with Charlie that it is wrong for everyone. I understand why some parents are thinking that right now, seeing all of the craziness and the chaos. But I was really curious to know your take on that and whether or not college still has value.
Well, first of all, I think it depends entirely on which college. I mean, I think, a Hillsdale, a Thomas Aquinas, their College of the Ozarks. There are some amazing schools out there. And I just, Grove City, I'm just thinking about all the, some of the really great schools out there that I think still do provide real value, provide a real grounding in the Western tradition, which I think is very, very important. But I'm with you. I mean, if you think about the amount of money that gets spent to go to one of these colleges, it can easily be well over 100,000, if not even over 200,000. What are other ways that parents might spend that money? And I think part of why I feel this way is because I had some very different educational experiences. So I had my 4-year college experience, which I thought was a very, very limited utility. I then went to graduate school, and I thought that was amazing. So I went to the London School of Economics, and even though I had Marxist professors, it was still incredible. Like, I loved it. But probably the most impactful part of my education was the several years that I spent kind of on living off my own money that I had earned, traveling to Central and Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And I'm just a big believer that I think nothing educates like travel and experiencing other cultures. I think nothing teaches you about the value of the United States as much as going to other cultures. And I think it really also enhances your empathy. Our son took a gap year. And it was I know that one of the most impactful experiences for him was he was traveling in Australia, and he got to meet with an Aboriginal man, just talking about, I think, the discrimination that he had experienced in his lifetime. And that was really sort of life-changing for Paul to hear that. And you just don't get those experiences, going through one of our 4-year colleges.
I know. I think it really has to be a combination, but that's just, being an active participant in life, right? And rounding out your experience and traveling and seeing things and reading things. I wish that I saw more of that nature in younger people today, because I think that's really, truly more educational than sitting in a classroom. But my argument, I think, still for the university system is to go in there and have great parents, if you can, that lead you through what you're actually learning and what influences are actually around you. But I don't want conservatives to entirely give up on colleges. I'm not a quitter. I don't want us to let these institutions die. I want to fix them. I want to change them from the inside. I want bright young people to go on those campuses and make a difference to turn it around. Because think about it. If you really did take that advice and every conservative kid or every conservative family decided not to send their children to a 4-year university, you're not going to have any conservative doctors. You're not going to have any conservative lawyers. You're not going to have any conservative people in fields that require these kinds of degrees. And whether that's right or wrong, it's just reality. It's how it is. You have to have certain degrees to go in certain places. And I don't know if I'm ready to just raise up the white flag and go, okay, you win, lefties. Liberals get the college campuses. The rest of us move on. I'm not ready to quit. I want us to be able to figure out ways that we can inspire young people to go on these campuses, things that we can't do, Katie, and make real change, like actually have a real impact, so that we aren't having these conversations and feeling like everything is lost because we've got Marxist professors running things and educators that are, administrators who are operating in the wrong way. I want kids to go on campus and challenge those people.
Well, and I would make the same argument for K through 12. I mean, there are a lot of people who, are fighting very hard for choice in education and homeschooling and fighting for classical schools. And I think all of that is brilliant. And I'm so glad they're doing it. But I would say the same thing, that we can't walk away from public schools. We shouldn't walk away from public schools and just give them over to the left. I think 85% of American children are still educated in public schools. And so there too, I would say, I think we really need to keep fighting for them and restoring the balance that we once had in those schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And the groups like Turning Point USA, just to go back to Charlie again for a moment, those groups are so critically important. And I can remember in college going through journalism school, and I was conservative. I always make jokes that I supported Jesse Jackson in my 6th grade college election, but that was the last time I really voted for a Democrat, and that was a mock election. And I was feeling something. I don't know. I was feeling something. I wanted to be different. I didn't want to do Bush. I didn't want to do Dukakis. I was an original. But by the time I was 17, I was a registered Republican. I voted in my first election for Bob Dole. Go figure, but it was the choice. And when I went to college, I actually went through a journalism program with very liberal professors. Even at that time when journalism was at least a little better. I mean, the influence was there, but you were still instructed in my journalism school anyway to tell the story, who, what, when, where, how, and why. And that was how you were supposed to tell stories. But when I got to a 400 level class and I had a practicum class, I had a teacher, like 12 people sitting around a table talking about ethics and journalism. And I can remember I was very shy, but I know that's also hard to believe, but I raised my hand and I actually challenged her on issues when it comes to ethically covering stories. And she sent me outside in the hallway. And I'm in my 20s. She sends me outside in the hallway because she didn't like what I had to say. But I looked at her and I saw 2 girls who were sitting across from me shake their head and give me a nod. And I thought, that's all I need. I need that because I know that maybe something I said impacted those 2 people. And maybe those 2 people, God love them, are in journalism somewhere. And maybe that sticks with them. So if we don't have kids, you may not win every time, but if we don't have kids who are willing to make the argument and push what is good and what is right, I don't think we can walk away. We're going to lose every institution if we don't fight for the colleges.
Yeah. And I just want to give a shout out as well to some of the great organizations that are supporting conservative kids on colleges. So Turning Point USA, Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women, Intercollegiate Studies Institute, and Young America's Foundation. I'm sure there are more, but those are the ones that just come to my mind. You want to see conservative on college campuses, support these organizations or connect your kid with these organizations. They're doing God's work right now.
That's exactly right. And as far as kindergarten through high school, this is where parents can even have more of an impact. That's when you can run for school board. That's when you can lead by example with your kids so that they can see fighting is not as scary and as hard as it looks. Once you get into the process and it becomes normal, you're raising really strong kids who can go on to that college campus and make a real change. So I don't know. I think that's an interesting thing that's on the minds of many conservative parents right now about what to do when we look at the protests and we look at failing institutions and we look at the indoctrination and we see all of this and we think, do we just throw up our hands and walk away? That's not my constitution. I can't do that.
Good. Amen for that.
Look at you. You say, good for you. I'll see you on campus. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Happy Women Podcast. We love having you here. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Share it with your friends. Leave us a 5-star review. We are so happy to hear from you and the comments. So far, we have had an outpouring of support, and you can always follow Katie, by the way. Just go to her website, katiegorka.org. You should get her book, Next Gen Marxism. You can search her out on Facebook as well at Catherine Gorka. And for me, well, you can follow me, Jennifer Horn Radio, on Instagram and Facebook, and Jennifer Jennifer Horn on Truth and Twitter. And again, subscribe to Happy Women. Thanks so much for being with us today. It's the Happy Women Podcast.